Our third speaker is Gene Schwab. Gene is leading the U.S. Environmental Protection Agency's new National Food Recovery Initiative in the Office of Resource Conservation and Recovery at EPA headquarters. She has worked in the resource conservation and recycling fields for 21 years, including over 18 years at EPA. Gene is the EPA lead and subject matter expert for organic materials management issues and serves on a number of national initiatives as a technical expert on materials and environmental management. She has a bachelor's degree in business and a master's degree in urban and environmental planning. Gene?
Hey, Joe, can you hear me?
Yes.
Great. This one actually worked. Thanks, Joe. And I'm going to blast through this a little quick, so hopefully I can get us done on time. And thanks to Dan and Mike, and they're talking about energy and water issues. I think they've touched on a lot of important aspects that maybe folks hadn't really realized the impact. And I'm going to kind of touch the other one, and that's going to be waste. So let's get to it. Next slide. So when we're talking about waste, what are we really talking about? And if you're in business, I mean, it really is business 101, that waste is a sign of inefficiency. It means you've spent your money for some resources, and if you're tossing away, you're throwing away that money, and you're not making the most of those resources. Next. What was really interesting is, because I work with a lot of major food retailers, manufacturers in the food service industry, to hear a major food manufacturer talk about that there was a certain amount of waste that's considered as an acceptable part of doing business. So their challenge was rethinking those issues, and that the financial accounting of waste material never had sort of a place in those accounting systems, and to make that happen so that we can really quantify and value and be able to start managing that was an important step that a lot of these companies had never done previously. Next. So when we're talking about food waste, I want you guys to really take a look at this slide. I think it's pretty staggering to realize that food is now the #1 material that we send to landfills in the U.S. That means we send more food to landfills than we do plastic or paper or metals or wood or even yard waste. So when you're driving down the street and you see those bags of leaves or grass that are put out here, we're putting more food waste out than that, better than twice. So that's a lot of resources. And I don't know if anybody's, people have probably seen, it was in the Washington Post today, the Los Angeles Times, the NRDC released information about just how much food goes to waste. So there's this real clarion call that's going on now to address food waste and the wastefulness and food loss that's happening in the U.S. Next slide. So where does all that food waste go? Well, it goes to the landfill, it goes to the dump. That's where the majority of our waste goes in the U.S. And the landfill is literally just a giant hole in the ground. They dig big holes, they put a plastic liner in there so it doesn't leach out and contaminate groundwater, and then we begin to pack it full of trash. Next slide. So this is what's going on in your landfill. These trucks are coming, they're dumping the trash, then these compactors like dozers drive back and forth over and trying to compact and cram as much waste as possible into those giant hole in the ground. So think about if you had to do that for your own waste, whether it's you're at home or your business and all the waste you created. If you had to go in the backyard and bury that or manage it every day, it might give you pause to sort of think about, is there a better way to deal with it? So here we are cramming it all in this hole in the ground. Next slide. And then what happens is that eventually, as that hole gets filled up, we cover it over, we try to keep it as dry as possible. We basically entomb it in there in perpetuity. So if you're taking your trash and you're putting it in plastic bags, and let's say in the kitchens, and then it goes dumped out into another giant plastic bag, and it basically gets put in a giant plastic bag in the hole in the ground. It's not going anywhere. It's a giant time capsule. We just cover it over with some dirt and some grass, and it'll stay there for eons. Next slide. and it's not going away. It will stay there forever, even for biodegradable and compostables. And for folks in the food service industry, we really have to think about this. Just because you buy something that's compostable or biodegradable, if you're still putting it in the trash destined for a landfill, it's not going anywhere. It's going to be in that time capsule in the ground. It needs to go to a composting operation or get degraded and returned to the soil for it to be of benefit. So if you're buying compostables, any of your serviceware or anything else, but you're putting it in the trash and just sending it off to the landfill, you're wasting your money by doing that. So really start thinking about this whole sort of ownership of your material. And what we're talking is sustainable materials management and really understanding what happens with everything that you buy, you purchase, you use, and what ultimately happens to it. It's going to get stored away in the landfills. It's not going anywhere. And then the landfills are huge sources of methane gas, greenhouse gas, and it's all a huge waste of your money. That's billions and billions of dollars that are stashed away in the ground there. Next slide. So instead of wasting this resource, why don't we do the most we can to take food and feed people, not landfills? So we're talking about feeding your customers and then the food that you have remaining, using that to feed those in need. So we want to use food as food and not feeding landfills. Next slide. And then you're always going to have scraps, you're always going to have excess, you're always going to have some spoilage. If that in turn gets utilized and composted, it can also be biodigested and create methane, and then the residuals from that turned into composting and a soil amendment to then feed the soil, to grow more plants, and to close the loop. This is one of those few materials that could actually be zero waste and sustainable. Next slide. As a matter of fact, when you take the compost or the organic matter from the food and put it back into the soil, you are restoring the soil that's been damaged through a lot of this crop production. And just by returning that organic matter back into the soil, you can reduce occurrences of drought and the need for irrigation. You can prevent soil erosion, reduce the need for chemical fertilizers and pesticides. You can also restore damaged and contaminated soils. So it's really staggering just how much. If you really think about the organic material going back into the soil, it's going to act like a sponge in that soil and be able to retain the water, the rainfall that does fall. It's not going to evaporate off, it's not going to run off, and it's going to remain plant available. So as you can see in this little stat, the 16,500 gallons of plant available, just by increasing 1%, that could mean millions and millions of gallons for just a 10-acre site easily. Next slide. And again, it is the total model of sustainability. We're benefiting people, the planet, and your bottom line, your profits, by making the most of this resource and not creating the pollution and the waste that's going on. Next slide. So I like to think about it, this is dealing with food, and food waste is problematic. It's an icky, it's an icky subject. A lot of folks don't do it because it's not easy, and it's, also just, plain old icky. But it's problematic, and instead of just constantly cleaning up after this puppy and trying to figure out what to do with it and how do we manage this waste, why don't we just house break it in the first place and not even create that waste in the first place? And how do we do that? One of the things we recommend is following EPA's food recovery hierarchy. Next slide. So if you think about the food and all your other materials that you're managing, if you go from the top to the bottom here and always try to keep this in mind, it might help you guide a lot of your decision making and ways to be more sustainable and greener and save a significant amount of money. So we're talking first doing source reduction, and then food for hungry people, food to animals, the industrial uses, composting, and last or least is the incineration or landfilling. Next slide. So what do we mean by source reduction? We literally mean reducing the waste at the source. So that includes things like reducing the overbuying and the processing waste, and also reducing overpreps and plate waste. And then the second step in this feeding people, not landfills, is to feed the hungry people and donating your wholesome food supplies, your prepared foods, to food banks, rescues, pantries, and kitchens. So let's show some examples of what I'm talking about here. First, for source reduction. If we're talking back of the house, there was a pilot that was done by Sodexo a couple years ago at 8 college campuses, and by simply monitoring and measuring the amount of waste that they were generating back in the kitchen, it raised the awareness as to what was actually being wasted and the causes of that waste. And then once they started looking at it and measuring it, then they understood that there were things that they could do to reduce it. And very easily and very quickly, they cut their kitchen waste by about 1/3. Then on the front of the house, they simply went to trayless dining. The kids could still get as much food as they wanted. They just didn't have a tray to fill up with. They had to, grab a plate of lasagna, and they had to grab a plate with a piece of pie. And if they wanted more, they went back up and got it. But they didn't have a tray to load up. By simply saying, get what you need when you need it, they reduce that waste by over 38%. And Airmark is seeing about the same things, about 30%. So you're reducing waste 30% in the back of the house, 30% in the front of the house. That's significant money. So the same amount of food is still being served, the same amount of revenues are still being gotten for the sale of that food, but the purchasing of the food and the storage and then the waste disposal that's not occurring anymore is pure profit right into your pocket. Next slide. Donations, the second step. So you've got extra tray of lasagna that was prepared but it wasn't served. By simply donating that, A, you're no longer paying to dispose of it, and B, you're actually getting some tax deduction benefits from it. Some significant savings, dollar and tonnage-wise, are occurring because a lot of corporations now are upping their food donation. Just the other year, Walmart donated 128,000 tons of food to hunger relief. And in 2013, they were looking at 1.1 billion pounds. I mean, that's a huge amount. And that's food that normally would have gone to the landfill that's now going to feed hungry people. It's safe, it's wholesome, you're protected by the Good Samaritan Act for your donations. So as long as you're donating food that you know to be safe, that you kept it in the right temperatures, hasn't been adulterated at all, you just can't use it, it's close to expiration date, you donate it, you're protected liability-wise by the Good Samaritan Act, which was passed in 1996, and you can possibly get tax donations for it. So again, it's just a win-win all the way around. Next slide, please. Third step, feeding animals. There's still a number of hog farmers that will take food out in Las Vegas. The MGM Grand International, with major hotels and restaurants out there, does a significant amount of food to a local hog farmer, so it's not going to the landfill. And that Rutgers University also does that. It's growing. There's less and less available, but it is still an option and one that you might want to look at depending on where you're at. Earlier, the industrial uses, earlier was mentioned, Mike had mentioned about biodiesel being made from fryer grease. So that is still something that you want to look at. Another thing that falls into that option is the anaerobic digestion of food waste. It goes to basically an enclosed tank where it's allowed to go anaerobic and create methane gas, and the methane is sucked off to create energy, and then the compost is used as a soil amendment. So it only falls under this category if you're utilizing the end product of that. If you're taking the residual from an anaerobic digestion and it's going to landfills, then that's not a good thing. Basically, it's the same as incineration. You're throwing away that resource. So you really need to kind of look at where the material is going ultimately when you do these things. Next slide, please. Composting. If you've got some local composters nearby, that's ideal. That's a little further down the step, or on site if there's something available to make the use of that. And the very last step is landfilling, incineration, and that also includes anaerobic digestion, where the residuals are going to the landfill, or waste-to-energy plant where the ash is being landfilled. What you want to try to follow is what's happening with that material. The same as that machine that digests or garbage disposal or anything else, if it's going down the drain, because you put it down the drain doesn't mean you eliminated your waste. It just means you put it in a different place. Instead of the dumpster out back, you flushed it down the drain. And if that drain pipe is going to a sewage treatment plant and they're going to spend all their time and energy separating the solids from the liquids and then taking the solids and putting them in a landfill, 100% of the material you sent down the drain is still going to end up in the landfill. It might have been ground up and made to a smaller size, but it's still all there, and it's not being put to a beneficial use. And what we want to see is that material actually going closed loop, getting back into the soil, restoring the soil, and becoming the basis for new plants, new growth, and new food. Next slide, please. So this is kind of what I was talking about, trying to graphically illustrate that. On the left, you're going to see what we consider a model of sustainability, going from cradle to cradle. So from the food user, the growers, all the way down through donation, soil amendment, back up to crop production, and then again back to the table in your kitchens. On the right-hand side, this is what's unsustainable. If you're creating the waste, even if you veer it off to the side for some energy production, but it's still ultimately ending up in the landfill or the incinerator, that's a cradle to grave. And we want to try to get away from that, and we want to, again, close the loop and be truly sustainable. Next slide. So what's coming down the pike? Just last year, Connecticut passed a law that requires companies to compost if they produce more than 104 tons a year of food waste, and that includes the unrecyclable soiled paper, things like pizza boxes or any of the soiled packaging that cannot be recycled. And this applies to the commercial food wholesalers, industrial food manufacturers, supermarkets, resorts, and conference centers. So it really is striking home. Massachusetts is right behind them now, and you're wondering, there may be other states that are looking into this. So you'd want to get ahead of this. It's just going to be smarter to reduce your generation in the first place so that you don't even come close to those elements and have to worry about finding a composter if you can not create the waste in the first place. Next slide, please. So EPA has tools and resources to help you address your food waste, and they're on our webpage, epa.gov/food recovery. There's some calculators where you can plug in what you're currently doing and then put in some alternative scenarios that you want to send some to composting, you're going to source reduce, you're going to donate, and how that will map out for you economically and quantitatively over time. We even have waste audit sheets, just PDFs that you can use to start measuring your waste. Next slide, please. EPA is also offering our Food Recovery Challenge to really challenge business and industry to take a bite out of their food waste. And businesses can receive our national recognition for their outstanding challenge achievements and their leadership. So I encourage you to look at our webpage for more information, epa.gov/food recovery challenge. Next slide. What we'll do for you with the challenge is give you recognition awards. We'll do case studies. There's also tools and resources that are available on the webpage to our participants. Next slide. What's in it for you? You're obviously going to reduce your costs by making the most of your resources, improving your image, helping your local communities, and helping to protect the environment. Next slide. So in closing, maybe a little to-do list to walk away with. Think about joining us at the Food Recovery Challenge. Next thing you should be looking at really doing is do a waste audit. Really know what you throw. We have tools on the webpage that help. If you're not doing it already, you really have to understand that there's a cost associated with throwing out the materials. And you paid for it, you're throwing it away, there are other options. But really go and measure what you're throwing away. Contact your local food bank and rescues to see about hooking up with them on taking some of your excess surplus food. Go and find a local composter. There's a website called findacomposter.com that you plug in your zip code and you can see what composters are around. And then consider modifying your service contracts to demand better performance, greener services from your service providers. Last slide. And that's it. So for more information, you can reach me at that, or here are our webpage addresses. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Jean. A number of questions came in about whether we would be posting the PowerPoint presentations. I just wanted to remind you that we will be posting the PowerPoint presentations and an audio tape of the 3 talks that were given today in the next several weeks on our Greening the Food Services website at www.cleanarinfo.com/greeningfoodservice/. Again, many thanks to our speakers, Michael Oshman of the Green Restaurant Association, Dan Cook of Conservation Solutions Corporation, and Gene Schwab in the EPA's Office of Resource Conservation and Recovery, and to you folks for tuning in today. This concludes our webinar.